Let me share with you 3 of my best all-time driver videos. You know, driving doesn't have to be that complicated, especially when you get some of the secrets that I'm going to share with you here. Let's go and get started. Let's talk about one of the biggest myths out there with setting up to the golf ball. And a lot of times when players, especially if you're like myself, you're a little bit technical, you want to set up correctly, you think about getting everything square. I'm going to get my feet, my hips, my shoulders, everything square to my target line. And I'm going to do that by setting up with my shoulders pretty level. So now everything will be nice and lined up. My weight is 50-50. We're going to get to that in a minute here. But what this actually does, it causes you to line up a little bit open when your shoulders are level. So if I'm thinking about setting up with my shoulders level and my spine straight up and down, it's going to typically lend me to weaker shots and probably a little bit more fade biased. What we actually want to do, well, first let's talk about why this is incorrect or why this can skew our alignment. If my shoulders are level, if my hands were on the same spot of the club, maybe that would work because then my shoulders and everything would be square. But where my right hand is farther down the club, you notice from the down the line view, when I put my hand farther down, all of a sudden it opens my shoulders. So if I'm going to keep my shoulders level, they're going to be open when I grab my right hand farther down the club. So if you look at your address from down the line and it looks like your right forearm is a little above your left forearm, this could be something that you're doing. We actually want to have a little bit of tilt of the shoulders, and if you can imagine they're set up like this, I'm going to go ahead and bump toward the target and get my shoulders tilted back a little bit along with my spine angle. So if this is straight up and down, I'm going to bump my spine a little bit away from the target. When I do this, I may feel like my hips close a little bit and I may feel like my shoulders close a little bit, which will compensate for the right hand being lower. And now when I set up, you can see that my shoulders look pretty square from this angle. And now my forearms are pretty matched up. And this puts me in a great position to where now I can go ahead and swing pretty natural. I'm gonna come more from the inside rather than over the top. And I'm gonna have a lot more power and easily be able to hit that draw. Let's go ahead and check it out. There we go. Very, very straight. Great ball flight. Just a nice little draw. Could have hit that one a whole lot better than that. So that's piece number 1. If we try to set up with those shoulders level, that could actually be something that we don't want to do. We want to get a little bit of tilt in there. Now, if you're having trouble doing that, what I want you to do is go ahead and feel like you get a little bit more weight on your right side. And that brings me to the second piece. A lot of times people want to set up with their feet perfectly balanced. Weight on as much on my right foot as my left foot. Now, with the majority of players, I see them keep getting their weight to the right side way too late, and then keeping it on their right side way too late, so that when they start their downswing, they're not getting back to their left, they're not getting their weight in front, and just like you're seeing with the pros, and finishing in this nice balanced position coming all the way on through. Most players I see have a very late weight shift to the right. Once it gets to the right, it's there way too long, and then we end up falling back away from the target or having to really feel like you're working hard to get through the golf ball. It doesn't have to be that hard. Let me go ahead and show you a way that's gonna pair up with that first way too. So if I set up with my weight 50-50, my shoulders will be level. I'm gonna get a little more weight on my right side. I wanna feel like I'm probably 60% on the inside of my right foot at address. That's gonna help me get that tilt that we just talked about. Now, the reason I like to start with my weight on my right is when you're studying what they call pressure plates and ground force reaction. I know it sounds like it's a lot of science going on there, but it can be boiled down very simple. When they study the best players in the world, what they find is the weight is most to the right, about right here in the swing. So when your club's parallel to the ground to when your left arm is parallel to the ground, that's about as far of a weight shift to the right as you're going to get. From there, it actually begins to shift back to the left as you're completing your backswing. So as my arms and hands are still swinging back, I'm actually already starting to get to my left side. That's what allows you to get to your left side through contact and then swing all the way on through. So the key is something that's kind of counterintuitive. If I want to get to the left easier, I need to actually start with more weight on my right side. So here's what I'm going to feel. I'm going to feel like I put a little pressure on my right side to start with, probably 60% right side. That may be a bit of an exaggeration, but I'd rather it be right too early than not early enough. So I'm going to start with it there. That's going to help me with my tilt that I want to get me from the inside and get a nice draw. And then from there, I'm going to feel like my first move is to press the inside of my right foot into the ground. Imagine there's something under your foot and you're going to press it into the turf. If the ground was a little bit soggy, you're really going to be able to push it in there and almost dent the ground a little bit. That's my first move. Then from there, as soon as I press it into the ground, I want to think about getting left and then swinging down. So I'm starting right, I press, just like this, press, and then I go left, swing down to my good full finish. So you'll notice with myself, I even have a trigger. My left toe will start to come off the ground a little bit. I don't even realize I do that now. But that helps me to kind of press into that right side to start. So let's go ahead and try another one here. Again, feeling like I'm already starting on my right side, getting my weight left, then I make my downswing. There we go. Nice rhythm back and through. Had no problem getting through that golf ball, hitting a pretty good shot. Now finally here, I want to talk about something that I wish I'd done a long time ago. I was always taught to really keep a lot of flex in this right leg and to kind of restrict my hips as I'm making my backswing. So my hips don't move very much, my right leg stays flexed at address and stays flexed the entire backswing. Now if you really want to hit with some easy power, what you want to do is go ahead and feel like when you get that pressure into the right foot like we just talked about, go ahead and let that right leg straighten up a little bit. That's different than a sway. This is a sway where I'm letting my hips move. This is me letting my right leg straighten a little bit. What ends up happening is as I press into the ground and let my right leg straighten, look how that gets my hip going way back. I can really get a lot of hip turn when I do that. If I keep this knee flexed as I put pressure into it, I'm getting almost no hip turn at all. So as you start to transfer your weight to the right early, go ahead and let that knee straighten out a little bit. Get those hips turning. The more those hips turn, the more easy power that you're gonna have. So notice how on this swing, my right leg straightens a little bit on the backswing to allow me to get a bigger hip turn and just get a whole lot of easy power from it. There we go, nice and straight. Another good drive there. So when I restrict this leg, I can't get that turn. My hips won't rotate. When I don't rotate my hips, my shoulders and my arms won't rotate. If you feel really stiff, that could be something that's causing you a lot of problems. All right guys, alignment. It's one of the biggest frustrations in golf. We go out there, we're going to play around. We play about half the round, we're hitting the ball terrible, the ball's flying all over the place, and then your buddy tells you, hey, by the way, you're lined up 40 yards too far to the left or 40 yards too far to the right. You fix it, and then all of a sudden you start hitting better shots. So how do we get, number one, how does alignment get so far off? How can we get 40 yards or 20 yards left or right and not even know it? And then number two, how do we fix it and get a routine so we can get lined up well every single time? That's exactly what I'm gonna show you today. So first off, it's very important. The most important thing is to always put a stick down every time you're hitting range balls if you want to have your alignment good, because your mind's eye will drift. It'll start to line you up more to the left or the right without you even realizing it. What happens is if we don't have this stick here and I start to hit some golf shots, I'm practicing at the driving range, for whatever reason, it may feel a little bit better for me to start lining up a little more open or a little bit more closed. And that starts out where I hit a few balls and I'm a little open with my feet. And then all of a sudden I go a few more weeks without checking my alignment and I get more and more, and it gradually starts to drift this way and this way. And now all of a sudden I'm lined up way over to the left or way over to the right. So your mind's eye is just like training your muscles. I need to constantly have feedback for my mind to allow it to square itself up with the target out in the distance. So if I have this stick down, I'm lining up my feet parallel with that stick. Now, after repetition after repetition, it's training my eye for what it sees with the target and how that feels with my feet. So if I always put a stick down, my alignment's gonna be great. And if I don't put a stick down, my alignment's always gonna be terrible. I'm always gonna have to feel like I'm way out of whack. So every single time you hit golf balls, put a stick on the ground. So once we've done that, or once we understand that idea that we have to do this every time, what's a routine that we can do to make sure that it doesn't get off track? So what I'll do is I picked out a target here in the distance. You can see a white flag, and what I've done is I've lined up the camera, this stick, and the white flag way out in the distance, all in a perfectly straight line. And that's gonna be where I line my feet and the ball up to. So as I'm hitting golf balls, I could have my feet right on this target, or if I move over here after I've hit 15, 20 golf balls, I can have my feet here. But no matter where I go, I'm just making sure, even if I move back, I'm making sure that my feet are staying roughly parallel with this. So I have this reference point down, and my feet are staying parallel, which means they're gonna be parallel to the target way out there in the distance. Sometimes you'll hear people say parallel left, and they'll talk about where your feet should be 10 or 15 yards left of the target. I honestly have no idea what they're talking about. It doesn't quite make any sense to me. You may want to have your feet a little bit left if you're playing a draw and hitting down into the ball, because your path is going to be, if I'm hitting down, my path is going to be working out to the right a little bit more. That's fine. You could line up a little left every time, but the whole parallel left doesn't quite make sense. It's either parallel and my feet are, you know, 1.5 feet inside that ball all the way out there in the distance, or it's not. But we won't get any farther down that subject. Just put this down toward the target, and then I can move around keeping this parallel with my feet. Now, when I'm out on the course and I want to get my alignment really good, now I'm not going to have this stick down there to be my baseline. So I have to use another system to make sure that I'm getting really good alignment every time. So what I will do, and I'm going to stand to the side so you can see this pretty well, is I'll come step behind the ball if you're struggling with alignment, and I'll put a club up over my ball and toward my target, or wherever, more importantly, my starting line, where I want this ball to start up in the air. So I'll line that up, and then once I find that, I'm going to pick a spot out in the ground about a couple feet in front of my ball. Maybe there's a leaf, maybe there's a divot, whatever it is, but I'm going to put that spot perfectly in alignment there. Now from your camera view, because we're lined up down this stick, that may not look perfectly lined up to my target, but that is dead on my target line. So that's just a camera kind of optical illusion. That may look like it's pointing to the left or something like that. But once I have this down, now I'm going to go through my routine. So the way I like to do it is I'll take a couple practice swings behind the ball, and then when I come into this shot, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my right hand and I'm going to line up the face of the club square to my point out in front, which is also square to the target. So I'm kind of standing side on like this. Now from there, once I get that lined up and everything looks good, now I'm going to go ahead and take my grip with both hands. And while I'm looking at the target now, I'm going to step into the ball. So I'm going to go ahead and go back and forth, step in the ball, work my feet, and now I'm lining up while I'm looking at the target. And usually that's going to be pretty daggone close to being square, relatively close to being square. What I don't want to do is to line up the face of my club to this point in front, look down at the ball, and then line up my feet, because I can't see the target. I could easily line up there, or I could line up there. I want to make sure that after I square my face, I'm looking at the target as I set my feet, and that's going to get me pretty well lined up. So to be sure, the last thing here I'll leave you with is we got to make sure that we videotape every once in a while to see if our alignment looks good. And what I'm checking on video that I can't see with just the stick is I'm looking to see, are my shoulders, my hips, my shoulders, everything else, is it lined up pretty square? I want to make sure that those are roughly in the general idea there. So that's how I go through making sure my alignment's nice and square. Now that said, I want to leave you with one final thought here, is that we don't have to be perfectly square. There's great players, some of the best players in the world, that line up a little bit open. For example, as some pros will tend to line up a little open with their shoulders. So at address, their shoulders may be there. Doesn't make much difference, because as I come back down to impact, my right heel's off the ground, my right leg's move, my hands are in a different position, my hips are in a different position, and my shoulders are in a different position. So it doesn't mean that if we line up straight, we're going to hit it straight. It just means if we line up consistently, we're going to be consistent. So nothing wrong at all. Let's say that you play a little bit of a fade type shot, lining up a little bit left of this stick. That would be completely fine. I just want you to line up the same way every time. That way we have a good foundation to build from. Same thing there. I could line up a little bit to the right if I play a draw. No problem with that. So your alignment doesn't have to be exactly the same for every player. It just needs to be very consistent. Whatever you like to do needs to be consistent for you. So me personally, I like to be just a hair open most of the time. So I'm going to go ahead and go through my routine. I'm coming back here. I've got my point out in the front of the ball. I put a tee down there to mark it for now. I'm going to step into this shot, line the face up with my target and that tee, and then I'm going to look at the target, and I'm going to go just a little bit to the left of it. So you can see how my feet are a hair open. That's my personal preference. Once I line up like this, then I'm going to go ahead and make my normal swing. There we go. Nice straight shot right toward the target. Work on that routine, get lined up consistently for your game, and you're going to play some great golf. Daggone, I've been missing left all day long.
Man, you are aimed that way. Don't move. Put your feet down.
What do you mean?
I'm going to put this down. You come back here and look at this. Tell me where you're aimed at.
I knew something was way off. All All right, so we're having some fun there, but that's a conversation that every single person has had with one of their playing partners, every person that's ever played golf. We're gonna dive into alignment today and talk about some of the mistakes that you can fall into if you're too open or you're too closed and what you should look at there. Now, before I get into that, you really don't have to be exactly correct with your alignment. I could be a little bit open with my stance and I could play a draw. I'll actually prove it right now. I'll be a little open with my stance, actually significantly open with my stance. And then here I'm gonna play a draw. There you go, see that ball started down the right center of the fairway and drew right back into the middle of the fairway. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to play a draw that way. I'm just saying your stance isn't everything. Here's what I would recommend. When you're playing well, notice where you're lined up. When you're making a really good, fundamentally solid swing, do you have a tendency being a little bit more open like Trevino, being square like tons of great players, or being a little bit more closed, maybe like a Ben Hogan would be? Learn your individual preference and then check that when things get off to see if you're setting up that way. Let's talk about now some of the things that you can fall into when you don't get lined up correctly. A lot of times, especially if you tend to hit a fade, I'll see players that start to get their stance more and more open. And the reason for that is when that fade starts to the left and fades to the middle of the fairway, if you overfade, you're always gonna miss to the right. You're gonna typically miss to the right. So once you do that a few times, you start to go more and more left. So if I tend to go more and more left, my stance gets pointing this way, that's gonna exaggerate that bigger left to right curve on the golf ball. You're gonna see here how this alignment stick, my feet are open to that, and that's gonna promote me coming more and more this way. Now that can really affect my distance. You'll see on that last drive, 116.8 miles an hour of club head speed, 317 total distance. Let me make the same swing speed swing here, but now I'm gonna play a little bit more of a cut swing. Let's give that a try. All right, so I hit that one really solid, but because I faded it, because that face was open, I'm gonna lose a little bit of distance. It's not gonna be a ton, but every yard matters. If you can get it more yardage, that's way better. So 117.5, about the same swing speed. My carry distance went down and my total distance down went to 282. So you can see when I get lined up too far left, especially if you're someone that tends to slice, check that first. Now here's the thing that most people get wrong when they do that. They change their feet, but they don't change their body. So what happens is, if you're a big slicer, you line up and your feet and your shoulders are both going left. You change your feet to be straight, but look at what the shoulders do. Instead of being square here, they end up going back to the left again anyways. So a lot of times I'll see players that look like this. They have a big slice and this is their setup. Their shoulders are to the left and they just kind of stuck their feet out to the right. You know, I could have my feet be like this. If I'm open with my shoulders and my body, it's still not going to be good for my consistency. So the big thing to check there is once you square up your feet, also square up your shoulders. Feel like, if you're looking from face on, have a little bit of a tilt so my head is looking down a little bit at the back of the ball. That's what we call the stable fluid spine at address when we're talking about that in the top speed golf system. Also, feel like your right shoulder is a little lower and a little bit more to the right than your left. So now I'm in a pretty good position. If I was to draw a line down my shoulders, it's going to be pretty square to where my feet are. This is makes it much easier to hit a draw. So I'm going to feel like I go a little bit more that way. Now I really feel like I can hit that big draw or that nice baby draw and really hammer it. All right, so dead straight, got rid of that slice. Just in the right center of the fairway. That one maybe drew a few yards. You look at the distance on that one, back up to 323, so hammered pretty hard. Now on the opposite direction, let's say that I tend to line up too far to the right. Again, one of the things you might be doing is lining up to the right and overhooking it. So if you line up to the right and you start hitting hooks, and you want to straighten that out, getting your feet a little more square would help. But then sometimes what players will do again is they'll line their feet up square, but then they'll get their body lined up way right. So now my shoulders are pointing over here. I feel like I'm really coming from the inside. Well, I'm gonna still continue to hook it if I do it that way. So we can see how that was a big swinging hook that I hit into the left rough because my shoulders were still tilted that way. So once you check your feet alignment, make sure that your shoulder alignment is square there too. I don't want that way over here or way over here. or things can get off track. I'm gonna start hitting those big fades and those big hooks. So let's go to the other details here that are really important with this. One of them I already mentioned. Once I get my feet and my shoulders square, I wanna make sure that I have a little bit of tilt and my right shoulder is slightly lower than my left shoulder. If I take this club and I put it on my belt buckle and I put the top of the club at my shirt buttons, I want to tilt away until that line is going to the inside of my left leg. So my shirt buttons are behind my belt buckle and my spine angle's tilted slightly away. The reason this is important is because I have to be in this position to be able to get lag and to release that club out in front of this golf ball. If I'm straight up and down, I'm gonna cast. So I wanna have a little bit of tilt there. I wanna feel like my head is behind the golf ball, and now I'm set up in a pretty daggone good position to give this a good rip. There we go, nice and straight, right down the middle of the fairway. So from there, I'm in a good position with my body, I'm in a good position with my feet, I'm in a good position with my shoulders. Finally, I wanna be in a good position with the ball. I wanna really make sure that this ball is toward the instep of my left foot if I'm hitting a driver. That way I can make sure that I'm hitting a little bit more up on it, or at least level with the ball. Now when I switch over to an iron, if I want to be lined up correctly, I'm going to play the ball a little bit farther back. And it doesn't change that much when I go from a long iron to a mid iron. So long iron, the ball is essentially pretty much in the middle of my stance, maybe a ball up in my stance. And I have a wider stance here because this is a longer iron. Now, when I go to a shorter iron, the ball position is still gonna be pretty much the same spot. The only change is my right foot is gonna be a little closer to my left foot, not quite as wide with my stance when I'm hitting a pitching wedge. So really the relationship to your left foot and the ball stays the same with all shots off the ground, whether it's a 3-wood, whether it's a 4-iron, or whether it's a pitching wedge. The only difference is, as I narrow up my stance, that's gonna make it look a little farther back in my stance because this foot is going from there to there. So the ball position in relationship to your left foot with all clubs off the ground is gonna be pretty much universally the same. If I can do that, then things get a lot easier. I can hit driver, I can hit irons, I get lined up nicely like I am when I'm playing well, and when things get off track, those would be the very first things that I would check. So now how do I actually figure out where I'm aimed if I don't have somebody telling me? Let me walk you through the best way to do that. First off, when you're on a driving range, always make sure that you have an alignment stick on the ground. Your eyes are gonna tend to shift. What feels square to you may be way to the right, or it may be way to the left over time. We're always kind of shifting a little bit. The good news is, I really never see anybody that aims up way to the right and then way to the left, and then way to the right, way to the left. We have one thing that's a preference. So even if you're only gonna hit 10 balls on the driving range before you play, you put this alignment stick down towards your target. When you set up and look down at your feet in relationship to that stick, you're gonna see if you're lined up too far to the right that day or too far to the left. So that helps out a ton. Once I start to understand my preference that day, then I can adjust it if I'm not hitting very well. Once I get out on the course, I would recommend lining up this golf ball, standing behind it, lining it up with the target in the distance, and picking a spot out on the ground in front of the golf ball. What I can do now is, as I set up and address this golf ball, I'm gonna line my club face with that spot right out in front. And then this is gonna be me stepping in, not taking my stance yet. When I take my stance, I'm gonna look toward the distance. And what happens here is if I look toward the distance and naturally let my feet get in alignment, I'm gonna be pretty daggone close to being good because I'm looking at my target in the distance. The worst thing you can do is gonna get your alignment way off. Even if you line at this spot here, if I'm looking at this golf ball and I take my stance, I could really get off angle there because I really don't have a good feel for where my target is in the distance. So I always want to be looking at the target in the distance as I take my stance, take my alignment. That's really going to help things. And then finally, what we talked about earlier in this video, make sure I have a little bit of tilt. If I'm no tilt, straight up and down, leaning left, my shoulders are going to be open. If I'm way too much tilt and I'm way over here like this, my shoulders are going to be too closed and pointing to the right. So a little tiny bit of tilt, and now I'm in the perfect setup. So face first, line it up toward the spot in front. Look at the target, line up your feet. From there, little bit of tilt, and man, I'm in a great position to really let this one fly. Now this angle that I'm talking about is what I call the stable fluid spine in the Top Speed Golf system. It's really one of the fundamentals of the swing. Once I get that angle, I can swing around my spine to the top of the backswing and swing around my spine in the downswing. That's going to be the right position for me to get lag and release this club in the front. If I'm way too tilted this way or I'm straight up and down, it's going to be very tough to get lag, and it's going to be very easy to cast the club and flip through contact, have all kinds of inconsistencies with not only your alignment, but where I'm grounding out if I'm hitting an iron, or whether or not I can swing square if I'm hitting a driver. I'm going to play one of the best videos that I've made on the stable fluid spine to show you how to go through that. I'll play a preview of that here in just 1 second. Go ahead and click the card that pops up on your screen. Or if you don't see that card, no worries, go ahead and click the link down below in the description and you'll get instant access to that video. You'll get your spine lined up right so you can play some of your best golf. Let's go and get started. What is it that allows us to have consistency in the golf swing? And what is it that allows that consistency to fall apart and create some bad rounds? That's what we're going to talk about in this video today. Let's go ahead and get started. Everything that happens in the golf swing is initially dictated by what happens with the spine. So if we're looking at a skeleton, you know, my spine's in the center of my body and everything else in my body is attached to my spine. So my shoulders are attached to my spine, my arms attached to my shoulders, and then my arms are going to be actually swinging the club. Now when I see players that are really struggling, those guys that are hitting it out in the woods right, they're hitting in the left, then they have a few good holes, what's happening is their spine angle is changing. As they go to the top of the swing, maybe they have a reverse pivot, spine's angled back, falling back to the right, but there's a lot of inconsistency in that. And what happens is, as good athletes as we all are, the #1 fundamental in golf, correct, keep it nice and stable, but fluid, we're going to be able to hit those good clean shots time and time again, and that's what I'm going to show you in this series of videos. Henrik Stenson, top 5 in both driving distance and accuracy. Rory McIlroy here, playing some of the best golf that anybody's ever played, and you can see just how stable.